And is the weight of iron? The Thompson submachine gun feels heavier than usual in Audie Murphy's grip as he crouches behind the crumbling stone wall of what was once a bakery. The Italian village of San Pietro stretches before him in November 1943, its narrow streets choked with rubble and the acrid smell of cordite. German Schmeisser bursts echo off the broken buildings, each muzzle flash revealing enemy positions dug deep into the medieval stonework. Murphy's squad has been pinned here for 3 hours, watching their ammunition dwindle while waiting for reinforcements that may never come. The morning briefing had painted this as a simple mop-up operation. Clear the village, secure the approaches, hold until the main force advances through the valley. Intelligence estimated maybe a squad of rearguard Germans, nothing the 3rd Infantry Division couldn't handle with ease after Sicily and Salerno. Instead, they walked into a carefully prepared ambush that speaks of veteran soldiers who know their business. The Thompson, scarred from weeks of fighting up the Italian boot, has become more than just a weapon to Murphy. Its familiar weight anchors him when everything else dissolves into chaos. The 45 caliber rounds punch through debris and doorways with authority, but he counts his remaining magazines like a miser counting coins. 2 left. Maybe 60 rounds between his squad and whatever the Germans have planned next. Around him, the remnants of his platoon huddle in whatever cover they can find. Sergeant Rodriguez bleeds slowly from shrapnel, his breathing shallow but steady. Private Collins, barely 19, keeps checking his empty rifle with shaking hands, working the bolt action again and again as if rounds might magically appear in the chamber. "How much longer are we gonna sit here, Murph?" Collins whispers, his voice cracking slightly. Murphy studies the village layout through the haze of brick dust and smoke. The Germans control the church bell tower and the town square beyond it, commanding fields of fire that make any retreat a death sentence. But staying put means dying slowly as enemy infantry work their way through the buildings, clearing each position with grenades and automatic weapons. The radio crackles with static and distant voices, calling for artillery support that battalion cannot provide. Too close to friendly positions, they say. Risk of friendly fire too high. The words sound reasonable over the airwaves, clean and professional. Down here in the rubble, with German voices drifting through broken windows, those same words feel like a death sentence wrapped in military courtesy. "We hold," Murphy says quietly, adjusting his grip on the Thompson. "Help's coming." But even as he says it, he wonders if he believes it himself. The weapon in his hands represents brutal efficiency in close-quarters fighting, the way it sweeps rooms and clears trenches with devastating effectiveness. He's learned to appreciate its simple blowback mechanism, reliable even when clogged with mud and debris. But efficiency means nothing without ammunition, and the Germans across the street sound like they have plenty of both. Rodriguez calls out weakly, reporting movement in the building across from their position. German voices drift through the broken windows, speaking in clipped, professional tones that Murphy recognizes. Not the green conscripts they fought in Sicily, but veterans, probably pulled back from somewhere worse than this forgotten Italian village. The irony isn't lost on him that his supposed resolve feels more like stubborn terror. Fear sits in his stomach like cold lead, but beneath it burns something harder to define. Maybe it's loyalty to the men around him, or maybe just the animal refusal to die quietly while others count on him to find a way out. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. The afternoon light, filtering through the destroyed buildings, casts strange shadows across San Pietro's ancient stones. Murphy moves carefully along the bakery wall, the Thompson held close to his chest, trying to get a better view of the German positions, without exposing himself to the sniper he knows is somewhere in that bell tower. Each step requires calculation. The rubble shifts underfoot, threatening to give away their position with a cascade of loose stones. Behind him, Collins has stopped working his rifle bolt, finally accepting that checking an empty weapon won't change anything. The kid's face has gone pale, but he's stopped shaking. Sometimes acceptance brings its own kind of calm. Rodriguez manages to prop himself against the wall, field dressing dark with blood, but his eyes still sharp. He's been in this business long enough to read terrain and tactics, and what he sees doesn't inspire confidence. "They got us boxed good," he whispers to Murphy. "Machine gun nest in that tower, probably mortars pre-plotted on every approach. Professional work." Murphy nods, studying the layout of medieval streets that have become a maze of killing zones. The Germans have had time to prepare, time to sight in their weapons and coordinate fields of fire. Every window could hide a rifle, every doorway a machine gun. The kind of defensive setup that turns attacking infantry into casualties, no matter how brave or well-trained. The radio crackles again with updates from other positions. 2nd Platoon reports heavy contact 2 blocks north. 3rd Platoon hasn't checked in for 20 minutes. The neat tactical picture from this morning's briefing is dissolving into the usual chaos of small unit actions, where survival depends more on improvisation than doctrine. "Murphy," Collins says suddenly, pointing toward a gap in the rubble. "I see movement. 3, maybe 4 of them working through that building." Through the Thompson's simple iron sights, Murphy catches glimpses of Feldgrau uniforms moving with purpose through the ruins. They're not panicking or rushing, they're executing a plan, probably the same kind of building-to-building clearance that the 3rd Infantry Division has used to push German forces back across Sicily and up the Italian peninsula. The realization settles over him like cold water. They're not fighting a desperate rear guard. They're fighting soldiers who know exactly what they're doing, who've done this before, and who have every advantage except time. "How long since we called for help?" Murphy asks. "Hour and a half," Rodriguez answers. "Maybe longer. An hour and a half in combat time feels like a day. Long enough for the Germans to maneuver into position. Long enough for ammunition to run low, long enough for wounded men to grow weak from blood loss, long enough to understand that help might not be coming at all." Murphy checks the Thompson's action, feeling the familiar weight of the bolt. The weapon that carried him through months of combat will have to carry him through one more impossible situation. But as German voices grow closer, he realizes that holding this position might require something beyond what any reasonable person would call courage. The Thompson's stock, worn smooth from countless hands, seems to whisper of all the soldiers who've gripped it in moments like this. Men who found themselves pinned down in places whose names they couldn't pronounce, following orders that made sense on maps but fell apart under fire. As shadows begin to lengthen across San Pietro's broken streets, Murphy makes a decision that feels both inevitable and impossible. The Thompson submachine gun that has anchored him through months of combat hangs loose in his hands as he explains his plan to Rodriguez in whispers that barely carry over the distant sound of German voices coordinating their next move. "Flanking movement through those ruins," he says, pointing toward a gap in the buildings that offers concealment but no cover. "Use the darkness when it comes. Hit them from the side while they're focused on this position." Rodriguez stares at him with something between understanding and disbelief. They both know what Murphy is really describing: a one-man assault against prepared positions, using surprise and aggression to compensate for impossible odds. The kind of action that gets written up for medals if it works, or forgotten quietly if it doesn't. "That's suicide, Murph. They got machine guns sighted on every approach. Staying here is suicide too," Murphy replies, adjusting his grip on the Thompson. "Just slower." The radio crackles with another update from battalion. Still no artillery support available. Still no reinforcements en route. The professional voices discussing tactical situations sound increasingly distant from the reality of 3 Americans pinned in the ruins of an Italian village while German infantry close the trap around them. Collins looks between Murphy and Rodriguez, finally understanding what's being discussed. His young face goes through a series of expressions: fear, admiration, protest, before settling into something like resignation. He's seen Murphy work before, seen the way he moves through impossible situations with a combination of calculation and controlled fury that defies normal military logic. "What about us?" Collins asks. "You hold this position. Give me covering fire when you can, but don't waste ammunition. When I hit their flank, they'll pull back from the tower. That's when you move." Murphy checks his remaining magazines again, counting rounds he can't afford to waste. The Thompson's brutal efficiency in close quarters depends on volume of fire, on the psychological impact of heavy slugs punching through whatever stands between the shooter and his target. But efficiency requires ammunition, and ammunition is something they don't have enough of. The German voices are closer now, speaking in the calm, professional tones of soldiers executing a rehearsed plan. Murphy recognizes the sound of orders being given, positions being coordinated, the careful preparation that precedes a final assault. They know the Americans are running low on everything that matters: bullets, time, options. What they don't know is that doctrine says isolated units should hunker down and wait for relief. But Murphy has never been one for doctrine when his men's lives hang in the balance, when following the manual means watching good soldiers die for the sake of tactical purity. The Thompson feels different in his hands now, not heavier, but more significant somehow, as if the weapon understands what's being asked of it. The simple blowback action that has functioned reliably through mud and blood and the chaos of a dozen firefights will have to function once more, perfectly, when there's no room for mechanical failure or human hesitation. Rodriguez grips Murphy's shoulder briefly, a gesture that says everything words can't convey. Collins nods once, checking his rifle with the automatic movements of a soldier who's accepted whatever comes next. "Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history." Murphy moves through the rubble like a ghost, the Thompson held close to his chest, each step calculated to avoid the loose stones that could betray his position. The gathering darkness of San Pietro's November evening provides concealment he desperately needs, but it also hides German positions that could end his flanking movement before it begins. The first building he enters still smells of bread from this morning's baking, a scent that seems to belong to another world entirely. Through broken windows, he can hear the enemy coordinating their assault on Rodriguez and Collins, voices confident in the knowledge that they're dealing with a trapped, outnumbered force that should surrender or die, according to the predictable patterns of small unit warfare. But Murphy has never been predictable, and the Thompson in his hands represents something beyond normal tactical thinking. The brutal arithmetic of close-quarters combat, where hesitation equals death and overwhelming firepower can substitute for overwhelming numbers. He reaches the edge of the German perimeter without being detected, close enough to see individual soldiers checking their weapons and coordinating fields of fire. They're professionals, all right, veteran infantry who move with the efficiency of men who've survived on the Eastern Front and know their business. But they're also human beings, and human beings have blind spots. The first position falls to a burst from the Thompson at point-blank range, the heavy .45 slugs punching through the makeshift barricade with devastating effect. Murphy doesn't pause to count the cost, already moving to the next firing position, using the enemy's surprise and his intimate knowledge of the weapon's capabilities to maintain momentum that doctrine says he can't possibly sustain. The Thompson's familiar cycling action becomes a deadly metronome as he works his way through the German line. Each burst is controlled, precise, aimed at disrupting their carefully coordinated defense rather than simply killing for the sake of killing. The weapon that has carried him through Sicily and Salerno and a dozen nameless villages performs exactly as designed: reliable, efficient, devastating at close range. Behind him he can hear Rodriguez and Collins taking advantage of the confusion, their own weapons adding to the chaos that has transformed a carefully planned German assault into a desperate scramble for new positions. The enemy's professional calm dissolves into shouted orders and the sound of soldiers moving without coordination, their tactical advantage evaporating under pressure they hadn't expected to face. When the shooting stops, Murphy finds himself standing in the church square, the Thompson's barrel smoking in the cold air. The German attack has collapsed, their surviving infantry withdrawing into the hills beyond San Pietro, rather than face a continued fight against an enemy who refuses to follow the rules of engagement they understand. Around him, the ancient stones bear fresh scars from modern warfare, but the position holds. The village that was supposed to fall to a coordinated assault remains in American hands, though the cost of holding it weighs on Murphy in ways that won't appear in any after-action report. The Thompson hangs loose in his hands now, its job done for another day, but he knows it will be needed again soon. The weapon that helped him hold an impossible line has become something more than metal and wood-shaped for killing. It's become a symbol of the refusal to surrender, when surrender seems like the only reasonable choice. Rodriguez and Collins emerge from their position like old men despite their youth, moving with the careful steps of soldiers who've survived something they're still trying to understand. They look at Murphy with expressions that mix awe and concern, recognizing that what they've witnessed transcends normal courage and enters territory that makes them uncomfortable in ways they can't easily define. The Thompson submachine gun rests against the church wall where Murphy placed it, the metal still warm from sustained fire. To anyone reading tomorrow's after-action report, what happened here will be described in clinical terms. Enemy contact, defensive positions maintained, objectives secured. But the men who lived through it know the truth runs deeper than paperwork can capture. "How many magazines did you use?" Collins asks, his voice carrying a tremor that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with witnessing something that challenges his understanding of what human beings can accomplish under fire. Murphy checks his remaining ammunition automatically, though he already knows the answer. All but one. Had maybe 8 rounds left when they pulled back. 8 rounds. The margin between holding San Pietro and becoming another casualty statistic was 8 rounds in a Thompson submachine gun operated by a soldier who refused to accept that his position was hopeless. The arithmetic of survival distilled to its most basic elements: bullets, determination, and the willingness to keep moving forward when every instinct screams to find cover and wait for someone else to take the risks. Rodriguez struggles to his feet, the field dressing on his shrapnel wound dark with blood, but no longer spreading. He's been in combat long enough to understand the difference between ordinary bravery and whatever drove Murphy through that German perimeter, and the knowledge sits uneasily with him. "You know they're going to want to write this up," he says quietly. "Medal recommendation, probably a big one." Murphy looks at the Thompson, then at the scattered equipment the Germans left behind in their withdrawal. Empty ammunition boxes, abandoned machine gun belts, the detritus of a carefully planned operation that fell apart when confronted with something it wasn't designed to handle. The evidence of what happened here tells a story, but not the complete story. "What they gonna write?" Murphy asks, though he already knows the answer. Squad held defensive position against superior enemy force. Casualties light, objectives achieved. But that's not what really happened in San Pietro this afternoon. What really happened was a 19-year-old soldier from Texas making a series of split-second decisions that saved lives while risking his own, in ways that would give nightmares to the officers who'll read about it later. What really happened was the Thompson submachine gun becoming an extension of Murphy's will, a tool for imposing his refusal to surrender on a tactical situation that should have ended with American casualties and German victory. The radio crackles with news that relief forces are finally moving toward their position, too late to affect the outcome, but arriving in time to occupy ground that Murphy and his squad held at a cost that won't appear in any casualty report. The weight of what he accomplished settles around him like an invisible burden, heavier than the Thompson, heavier than the equipment he carries. Collins helps Rodriguez prepare for evacuation, their movements careful and professional. But they keep glancing at Murphy with expressions that suggest they're seeing him differently now, as if the action in San Pietro has transformed him from a fellow soldier into something else, a legend in the making, perhaps, but also a reminder of the price that legends exact from the men who create them. Relief arrives as full darkness settles over San Pietro, bringing ammunition, medical supplies and fresh-faced replacements who stare at the bullet-scarred buildings with the wide eyes of soldiers who haven't yet learned what combat actually costs. Murphy sits on a broken wall, methodically cleaning the Thompson, while medics tend to Rodriguez and prepare him for evacuation to the aid station. The weapon that helped him hold an impossible line now seems ordinary again, just metal and wood shaped for a specific purpose. But Murphy knows that ordinariness is deceptive. The Thompson has become more than equipment to him, more than a tool for applying violence with precision. It's become a symbol of the refusal to surrender when surrender seems reasonable, of the willingness to stand when standing requires more than most people can give. Captain Harrison arrives with the relief force, a competent officer who'll write tomorrow's after-action report with the clinical precision that staff officers prefer. He surveys the defensive position, counts the abandoned German equipment, interviews the survivors with the thoroughness of a man who understands that paperwork shapes reality in ways that muddy boots and empty magazines cannot. Hell of a thing you did here, Murphy," Harrison says, making notes on a field pad that will eventually become official documentation. "Battalion's going to want a full briefing, probably Division 2. Murphy nods without enthusiasm, understanding that the story of San Pietro will be retold many times before it reaches its final form. Each retelling will emphasize different aspects: tactical innovation, individual courage, successful defense against superior numbers, while the essential truth becomes buried under layers of military language designed to make chaos seem manageable. But the essential truth is simpler and more complex than any report can capture. A young soldier with a Thompson submachine gun refused to let good men die for the sake of following doctrine that didn't fit the reality of a medieval Italian village turned into a killing ground by modern warfare. Everything else, the medals, the citations, the legend that will grow around this afternoon, is interpretation added later by people who weren't there. Rodriguez grips Murphy's hand briefly before the medics carry him away, a gesture that communicates what words cannot. He understands, as Collins understands, that they witness something that transcends normal military experience. Not because Murphy did anything supernatural, but because he did something entirely human. He refused to accept that good soldiers should die quietly when dying serves no purpose beyond satisfying the expectations of tactical planners. Years later, when Murphy is older and the weight of accumulated combat has settled into his bones like winter cold, he'll sometimes smell cordite and wet stone and remember San Pietro. He'll remember the Thompson's reliable action cycling in his hands, the way German voices sounded through broken windows, the expression on Collins's face when the shooting stopped. He'll remember that the medal citation describes what happened, but not how it felt, not the cost of carrying such memories forward through decades of peace. The Thompson submachine gun that anchored him through the worst afternoon of November 1943 will become a museum piece eventually, displayed behind glass with a small placard describing its role in the Italian campaign. But for Murphy, it will always represent something more personal: the weight of iron in young hands, the brutal arithmetic of survival, and the price of refusing to surrender when surrender seems like the only reasonable choice. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.